The Bills once again going to be one of the best teams in the NFL in 2025 as they have the reigning MVP, as controversial as it may have been, in Josh Allen. And he did it while having a pretty rough looking wide receiver room. Got the same room this year, so there's no reason to expect them to suffer despite not really having a big name wide receiver. I think the Bills are going to be just fine on offense as long as they have Josh Allen. And on defense, also going to be very solid, a legitimate case to have one of the best records in the NFL this season. But they have a very tough start to the season on Sunday night with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, the guy who arguably should have won MVP over Josh Allen going head to head in week one. Lamar Jackson, also an incredible quarterback. And I think the Ravens are going to be a great team on offense once again. You always know the Ravens have a really good defense too. This could go either way with it being a complete shootout, or the defenses could slow things down and this could be a very low scoring game. I have no idea what's going to happen that way. My main thing here is I think the offenses are very similar. I think that the Ravens defense is better. And in week one, I think talent is going to be a big factor. And that's why we have the Ravens pulling off an upset on the road against Buffalo to start the year. But this is going to be one of the best games of the week by far. Cannot wait for this one on Sunday night.
Easily could be the game of the year in week one. What a way to welcome back the NFL with a huge Sunday night game. Following week, not going to be as big of a game, but the Bills will start division play with a road trip against the New York Jets. And Jets have some hype surrounding them. They bring in Justin Fields after he was with the Steelers last year and had a fairly good start to the season before getting benched for Russell Wilson. And now they're bringing him in to hopefully have the same connection that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase have in Cincinnati, but with Garrett Wilson. And they paid Garrett Wilson a ton of money this offseason. And they're really banking on him breaking out this year, even more so than he already has. With Brees Hall in the backfield, the Jets might have a pretty decent offense, along with an offensive line that has taken top five talents in the draft the last few years. Really comes down to the defense. Sauce Gardner is still one of the best defensive backs in the NFL, but the rest of the Jets defense, I don't know is going to be as good, or at least not good enough to slow down Josh Allen and this Bills offense, especially with James Cook recently signing a contract especially with James Cook recently signing a contract extension to actually have him play the season rather than holding out for a new contract. That backfield duo between Josh Allen and James Cook is one of the scariest in the NFL. And then defensively, the Bills brought in Joey Bosa, who is still a very productive defensive lineman. They also have Tre'Davious White returning in the secondary, and while he is a little bit older, it's still going to be a fairly decent addition to this defense. I just think the Bills are the more talented team here, especially after coming off of a tough loss to the Ravens. I don't see them starting the year off 0-2. They'll get the win here and move to 1-1. And then they're in prime time once again. This time it is a Thursday night game against the Miami Dolphins. To be completely honest, we are not very high on this Dolphins team going into 2025. The secondary is an absolute mess after trading away Jalen Ramsey to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They brought back Minka Fitzpatrick, who is still fairly solid, but does not address their concerns of having a good cornerback. They're either all off the team now from last year or all dealing with injuries. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing that holds back this Dolphins team. We know the offense is capable of so much with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL. Devon Achane has shown to be one of the best young players in the NFL as well. And Tua, even though he has dealt with a lot of concussions the last few seasons, and there have been talks that maybe he needs to retire for his mental health, but he's still one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL, especially with the weapons that he has. But this defense, especially that secondary, is what's going to hold this Dolphins team back. Once again, I don't see how the Dolphins will be able to stop this Bills offense. And I think this Bills defense is plenty good enough to slow down the Miami offense. Bills will move to 2-1, getting two early divisional wins.
And then they go out of the division for just 1 week, real quick, playing the worst team in the NFL, in our opinion, in the New Orleans Saints. The Saints drafted Tyler Shuff out of Louisville to be their starting quarterback this season. And I think it's going to be a very, very rough awakening for him into the NFL. With the weapons that the Saints have, I think there is some potential, but it's just whether they can stay healthy or not. Alvin Kamara is a solid running back, but he's starting to get a little bit older. Chris Olave has been dealing with a lot of concussions because his quarterbacks have been consistently throwing him hospital balls. I think that the Saints are going to struggle a lot this year, especially if Olave cannot get back to form, which would be really impressive if he ever does manage to hit his career ceiling again. I just think the Saints are going to struggle a lot. They have some very talented players, but just not enough, I don't think, especially depth-wise, in order to play at a high, consistent level all season. So the Bills will get this win pretty easily, and then a matchup with the New England Patriots. And this Patriots team we actually like quite a bit. This is going to be a Sunday night matchup as well. And I think it's going to be a sneaky good one. Drake May had a very solid rookie season last year. One of the biggest stories this offseason, and especially as we're coming into the preseason now, is the Patriots' new running back, Travion Henderson. He is looking to be an absolute draft steal right now. I think he's going to have a very, very solid year in New England. So this Patriots offense is very young and very talented. I think the biggest question marks are going to be on defense, and it's still going to be a decent one. I just don't think it's anything compared to this Bills offense. They're not going to be able to slow down Buffalo enough to win this game, which is why we have the Bills winning this as well on Sunday night before in week 6, their fourth primetime matchup.
And that one is a Monday night game against the Atlanta Falcons on the road. And the Falcons are poised to have one of the most explosive offenses next season. This will be Michael Penix's first full season as the Falcons starting quarterback after having a pretty promising start to his career after coming off the bench for Kirk Cousins. And with the weapons he has, Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, this Falcons offense could end up putting up a ton of points, even against some of the better defenses. But the issues for this Falcons team will be on the defensive side of the ball. The secondary is not super strong. They do have a couple key players like Jesse Bates, still one of the best safeties in the NFL. And AJ Terrell does have a lot of potential. We've seen him play at a top tier before, but it's been a couple years since he's really been at that highest level, but it's still in him. The issues lie on the defensive line. They lost Grady Jarrett. He is now a Chicago Bear, and he was the backbone of this defensive line for quite a while, going back to that 2016 Super Bowl team. With him gone, I do think the Falcons defense will be the reason that they struggle a little bit this season, kind of like the Dolphins. And I don't think the Bills will be slowed down by this Falcons defense. Now, this might turn into a shootout because the Falcons offense is going to be so dynamic, but I will still take the Bills to get one key stop on this Falcons offense to win them the game. They moved to 5-1 going into their bye week. And coming out of that bye week, they're on the road once again, this time to face the Carolina Panthers. And kind of similar to the Patriots, we kind of like the Panthers this year. Now, they do have a pretty difficult schedule, and their team is still fairly young, but they were looking very solid towards the end of last year. And I think with drafting Tedero and McMillan as a weapon for Bryce Young is a huge step in the right direction for this organization. I think that means that they trust Bryce Young to be their quarterback for the future after they benched him initially earlier on in the season before bringing him back into the starting lineup. This Panthers team is going to be able to compete with some of these top teams, especially throwing in the fact that this is a home game for the Panthers coming off of a bye week for the Bills. Sometimes teams start out sluggish coming out of a bye week, but the Bills are not one of those teams. I think the experience of Buffalo is going to be the big reason why they can get a win over the Panthers. Could be a sneaky competitive game, but Buffalo is just the better team all across the board. They moved to 6-1 before the much anticipated game at home against the Kansas City Chiefs.
And I do think this is going to be kind of like the Ravens game, one of the best games of the season. You got two of the best teams in the NFL going at it in the middle of the season. Both teams should be healthy, hopefully, at this point, and really when teams are starting to hit their stride. So this is going to be an incredible game. I think that the Chiefs are going to be one of the best teams in the league once again, as much as people probably don't want to hear that. And realistically, they probably are the better team than Buffalo, but it's not the playoffs, which means the Bills actually have a chance to beat Kansas City. And I think with the home field advantage, you got two incredible offenses. The Bills against the Chiefs defense can definitely move the football. We've seen Mahomes do crazy things at the end of games. He can definitely move it on this Bills defense as well. I think this one is going to be a shootout again, but I think this time the Bills will win it and, set the Chiefs up pretty well to beat them in the postseason once again. But we haven't got to our postseason predictions yet, so you'll have to come back later to figure out what those are. Then it's a matchup on the road against the Dolphins. Kind of like Connor mentioned earlier, injury's a little bit of a concern with this offense. I don't know if they're going to be completely healthy at this point, and I really don't trust this Dolphins defense against the Bills offense. It's not super easy to sweep a division opponent, but like Connor said, we are not very high on this Dolphins team. I think of all the division opponents, this is probably the most likely for the Bills to actually get the sweep in.
They play another Florida team the following week, but it is at home this time against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are one of Jonah and I's favorite teams in the NFL next season. I know we've said that we like the Patriots to do well and the Panthers to do well, but the Buccaneers are a team that we actually think are going to be really, really good next year and compete for a Super Bowl. And that stems from the fact that this offense is insane. Baker Mayfield was putting up MVP caliber numbers last year with a wide receiver room that still had Mike Evans, but not playing at the peak that we've seen out of him. Chris Godwin was out for most of the year, and the third and fourth wide receivers were not as good. Now you have Mike Evans back, who's still Mike Evans. Chris Godwin's returning from his injury and looking to stay healthy. And Emeka Buka, their first round draft pick, has been an absolute stud in training camp. Throw in the fact that you have Rashad White and Bucky Irving in the backfield. This offense is going to be really tough to stop, especially for the Bills, even though their defense is going to be fairly decent. And the Buccaneers defense is also going to be fairly good. The secondary still has Antoine Winfield Jr., one of the premier safeties in the league. And Vita Vea is still one of the most impactful defensive linemen in the NFL as well. If they can get the most out of Hassan Reddick, who had a down year last year, but was an absolute animal with the Eagles 2 seasons ago, then we could see a really tough Buccaneers team to beat. They can compete with anyone in the NFL with that offense as long as this defense holds up. And this is actually going to be where the Bills fall for the first time since week one. Buccaneers getting a huge win on the road against the Bills. And then a road trip to the Texans coming off of that loss isn't going to be much easier. CJ Stroud entering year three had a bit of a down year last year by his standards, but still a very productive season. And a lot of the struggles that the Texans had, particularly CJ Stroud, stemmed from an offensive line that was among one of the worst in the league. Now, they made a couple adjustments and some additions to the offensive line to hopefully fix those problems, but only time will tell if those additions and changes actually produce any favorable results. But the wide receiver room is still going to be very, very good. Now, Nico Collins and Tank Dell both dealt with injuries last year. Tank Dell likely out for the entire season this year as well, but Nico Collins returning healthy. And they went out and drafted two Iowa State wide receivers in the NFL draft. And I think they're going to be very good weapons for CJ Stroud. Joe Mixon's still a very solid back. They got Nick Chubb, who, if he still has enough left in the tank, can be a very solid RB2 for the Texans as well. And defensively, you have some of the best young players in the NFL. Will Anderson coming off the edge, Derek Stingley, one of the best corners in the entire league. I really like this Texans team. I think they're going to bounce back after a relatively down year last year. And surprisingly, we're going to have the Bills lose 2 games in a row. Seems very unlikely considering that the Bills have so much firepower of their own. But I do think with a relatively weak wide receiver core going up against one of the better secondaries in the NFL, Josh Allen might struggle throwing the ball just a little bit, giving Will Anderson and this Texans defensive line enough time to pressure him, make him throw some errant passes, and maybe those turn into turnovers. That was one of the reasons why his MVP was a little controversial, considering how much he turned the ball over last year. That is going to be the reason why the Texans have a chance in this game if they can make Josh Allen uncomfortable. So the Bills fall to 8-3.
Then it's a road trip to Pittsburgh to face old man Aaron Rodgers and the Steelers. And we're expecting more of the same from Pittsburgh this season. Made a change of scenery at quarterback, but nothing is going to change record-wise. You will see them around 9 or 10 wins. Happens every single year. I think that they're going to be a little bit better on offense, most likely. Aaron Rodgers is a bit of an upgrade over Russell Wilson and also Justin Fields, who started the first few games of the year. They brought in DK Metcalf as well from the Seahawks. I think just overall, the offense should be good for the Steelers. The defense also, when you have TJ Watt, it's going to be very scary. They're going to get some pressure on Josh Allen. They have a very solid secondary as well. I just think as a whole, the Bills team is good enough to score more points than the Steelers are capable of at this point. I just don't see them being able to win a shootout, even though we think it's going to be a good offense. It doesn't feel like a high-powered offense. It feels like a more slow-moving offense that can score what it needs to, but not as much as the Bills are going to in this one, which is why we do have Buffalo finally getting out of this little 2-game losing streak back into the win column at 9-3. Then it's a matchup with Joe Burrow and the Bengals. Now, we think the Bengals are going to have a pretty rough defense once again this season, but the offense is going to be one of the best in the NFL, one of the best quarterback to wide receiver connections that there is, dating back to LSU with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. This is going to be a very, very scary offense for the Bills to go against. And I think the Bengals have the ability to win this one in a shootout. The only problem is the fact that this Bills defense can actually probably pull off at least one stop. And I don't think the Bengals defense is capable of that at all unless they get very lucky. This is a game that probably is going to have a ton of points. I just can't see the Bengals stopping this Bills offense enough to actually win it. So it should be close, probably pretty high scoring, but the Bills are going to win because they just can't be stopped by this Bengals defense.
We got back-to-back road games the next 2 weeks, starting with a rematch with the Patriots, this time at Foxborough. And Jonah already mentioned a lot of the points. We do think this Patriots team will see a lot of improvement this year and may be the second best team in the AFC East behind the Bills. But I do think they are a year or two out from really returning to a competitive level. This could be an interesting game, especially since it is a home game for the Patriots, and maybe second time around they will have a better game plan for Josh Allen. But once again, this is just too high powered of an offense to get consistent stops on, even if they do have one of the best young corners in the NFL as well in Christian Gonzalez. I don't think the pass rush will be able to affect Josh Allen enough or stop James Cook out of the backfield either. The Bills should be in firm control in this game and will move to 5-0 in the division and 11-3 overall with a win over the Patriots. And then that second road game is against the Cleveland Browns, who I don't even know where to start with. They have 6 quarterbacks on their roster, technically 5 because Deshaun Watson is out with an injury and pretty much not even in consideration for the starting job. But they have old man Joe Flacco, who, as we saw 2 years ago, was still able to compete. They have Kenny Pickett, Super Bowl champ Kenny Pickett, who was the backup for the Eagles last year and is okay. They have Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, who they both drafted in this year's NFL draft. And they recently signed Tyler Huntley, who has had flashes, was a Pro Bowler a couple seasons ago, but I really don't think he's going to get much starting time. But this Browns offense is just going to hinge on who is the starting quarterback. I don't expect much from this Browns offense, regardless of who is starting at quarterback. They still have a solid number of offensive players like Jerry Jeudy. Quinshon Judkins is now back after charges were not pressed against him. They recently signed Isaiah Bond as well. Browns seem to have a little bit of a type, but they also have Dylan Sampson, who they drafted in the backfield as well. So they have some young guys that they can use, but the Browns will be competitive because of this defense that has Myles Garrett, pretty much the best defensive player in the NFL. A secondary that just seems to get better and better every single year. And they also added Mason Graham on the defensive line out of Michigan, who is going to help Myles Garrett on the inside and plug up those run lanes. That's the only way the Browns can remain competitive, but this offense is going to be no match for what the Bills bring to the table. Bills move to 12-3, and that sets up yet another huge game against the reigning Super Bowl champs, the Philadelphia Eagles.
Another really tough game here for the Bills. It seems like they play the other three best teams in the NFL this season. This game against the Eagles is going to be a really tough one because when you look at complete teams, I mean, the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year. If you look at their defense, it's incredible. The offense with Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley is an incredible running back. And the wide receiver room that they have with both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, they always have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Obviously, you got the tush push, so if you get within 1 yard of a first down or the end zone, it is a first down or a touchdown. I think that the Eagles are going to be an incredibly difficult team to beat. However, at home, late in the season, I think the Bills have the ability to do it. Now, really, what we're doing here is not setting the Bills up that great for the postseason because it's hard to beat a team twice, and we're having them win these games in the regular season. But I really think that they can beat the Eagles here. It's going to be a very, very tough ask because the Eagles are a great team. This is going to be another great game. Arguably should be the primetime matchup. I don't know what they have in this one, but I doubt it's better than Bills Eagles. And yeah, we have the Buffalo Bills beating both the Chiefs and the Eagles in the same season. And then to close out the year, game two against the Jets. This one probably going to be pretty easy, to be honest. Connor hit most of the points for the Jets earlier. The Bills should be able to run away with this at the end of the year. I just don't think the Jets offense is going to be able to move enough. And Josh Allen can certainly put up a lot of points against this defense. So once again, Bills beat the Jets and move to 14-3. Now that's one game better than they went last season, and we do think that their floor is quite a bit lower. It's very possible we could see the Bills drop a few more of these games. We had them winning some very close ones, talking about the Chiefs game, the Eagles game. Bengals could go the other way. There's a lot of games on here. You could drop a division game even. It's very possible to see them drop a few that they arguably should not and finish around 10 wins. But I think that's the absolute worst case scenario. The ceiling could even go 15-2. I think that Texans game is probably the most other winnable one on their schedule. Really like the Buccaneers, like Connor said earlier. And obviously the Ravens are going to be good. 15-2 will not be easy, but I think that is the absolute max that we could see from the Bills this year. And then the Vegas over under at 12.5, plus 115 for the over, minus 135 for the under. So it's definitely a little bit favored towards going more like 12-5. I really feel good about this over for the Bills, though. It's not going to be easy, but they have a great team to make it happen.
Even with such a difficult schedule, like Jonah said, basically playing three of the best teams in the NFL and just most complete teams in the Ravens, Chiefs, and the Eagles. Throw in the fact that you're playing some of the most explosive offenses like the Bengals, the Texans, the Buccaneers, even the Falcons. It seems really odd for us to pick them to go 14-3, which might end up being the best record in football. But the Bills' offense is built to do that. If Josh Allen can win an MVP with basically no wide receiver core, there's no reason for him to not be in the same conversation once again this season. I really don't think the Bills will fall off from last season. At worst, it's just because of that difficult of a schedule. But the Bills should be right near the top once again, competing for a Super Bowl, hoping to get over that hump in the playoffs. But you will have to stick around until we get to our playoff predictions once we finish with all of these scheduled predictions. But for right now, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any more of our content. And we will see you in the next video.